even just if you're putting it on that spectrum, growing up as a male, there's a time when things changed for us, when we had the innocence where we were able to express our feelings and cry and laugh and have fun and play with everybody, to then all of a sudden, guys don't do that anymore. Guys don't do that. Guys don't do that anymore.
Tell us about who Shaun Earl is beyond the dancer.
Well, I also sing and I act as well. I don't, it's weird to be considered those things because being an only child growing up, when you're always being taught things because you're in school to learn, I never knew that that was considered talent because you just kind of do what grown-ups tell you to do. And you just do what you're learning. And I wasn't around people that could not sing or that weren't tone deaf or whatever. So I didn't know that it was talent until much later because being an only child, that was my self-amusement, just imitating what I saw on TV. And I thought I wanted to be everything I saw on TV, not knowing, oh no, I actually want to be on TV, not work at McDonald's and say, welcome to Burger King, may I help you? Or work at McDonald's, you know. So I didn't know for a while that it was considered talent until I kind of grew up and realized that, oh, people were acting on TV and everything like that. But I didn't go into it on a traditional level because I wasn't trained because my mother didn't take me to places to train as a child. So my influences were so training, American Bandstand. And you watch TV, you see the things that you learn, just learning steps from whatever dance is out. So once the the video craze started happening, and then Fame the movie came out, you started seeing a wider range of dancing for men because there was nothing that inspired me to think that that could be a career in my childhood because it's not the way it is now where it's accessible. And back then, you know, it's considered soft or you're a ballerina or whatever. My mother was not going to have me learning ballet or anything like that. She's like, you go outside and learn how to play basketball or it's a football, you know what I mean? But even then, I was like, okay, because I can do anything that was presented to me because I could just imitate anything. And I was good at whatever I just did. But I just thought that's what all kids do because we're in a facility where we learn and you play tennis, you play basketball. It's a curriculum, you know what I mean? So I'm kind of gagging still that this has been my career in my life because my approach wasn't as traditional as other people that had parents that guided them through studios after studios after studios of voice lessons. And I sang at church, but that was just church. There wasn't vocal lessons. You just sing. I had to sing solos because they found out that I could sing, but I still didn't think it was anything special about it, you know, because it was just no one knows other than people at church. You know what I mean? So me as a whole, I'm just, it's just that's all a part of me. So I'm blessed that I've been able to work because that is actually who I am. That is what I eat and breathe. But to get paid for it and make a living at it, that's just an added plus because it's not something I think about. If I think about it, then I mess up because it's more of a soulish effort than a technical effort on my part. But outside of dance, I'm a foodie. I love food. I travel. I love the beach. I love tropical things. Like, you know, I love meeting new people. I love experiencing new cultures. Even though I've had a wonderful career, the best part of my life has been people. Opening up to people, hearing their stories, learning about them, learning their cultures when you travel. That has been just the best thing and the most educational. I think that's pretty much where the world should be right now under these circumstances that we've experienced in 2020, because a lot of people are in their bubble. No matter what their lifestyle is, whatever their sexuality is, whatever, everyone stays in this safe bubble and has extreme opinions about people on the outside of the bubble based on the media. And it's not what it is when you go to a country or go to a city and you really get to tear down the walls and go beyond the stereotypes or what you think people are from the outside. So even meeting you, who has been daring, wore anything you wanted in class and you tried hard, whatever, you were a person that was interesting enough to speak to because you were unapologetic. And here we are now. You know, that's what makes life wonderful. You don't know what's in store until you dare to meet people, dare to talk to them, dare to find out, oh my God, not what they seem, because a lot of people judge people from their outward exterior.
Mm.
And there's so much more to people than what they appear to look like. And in Hollywood or wherever, people think they can sum you up in 3 seconds. And then they decide not to talk to you. And they miss out. And they miss out. Lost. You know what I mean? And that's all walks of life. But I'm luckily like that person that even as a child, my mother was like, I was open to the world even as a kid. I spoke to everybody. My mother was like, Shaun, it's danger out there. Even though you probably make friends with a kidnapper as well, but I'm just letting you know, you have to know the boundaries because danger, danger, you know what I mean? But you have discernment. You can kind of tell if somebody's creepy, but I love people. I love the learning and the exploration and the adventures that come from it.
That's interesting.
Before you continue, my apologies. Let me turn off do not call.
Okay, we just gotta edit something.
Hold on 1 second, love. Thank you very much. Okay, there. Okay, excellent. Thank you, love.
You touched on something that was interesting. Being a kid who was born and raised in the 80s and growing up, and you already established your career in the 80s, when you talked about being told that you have to play football. And you know, I know for me growing up at that time, I've heard those conversations too, because growing up, I loved She-Ra and I was into Wonder Woman. Yeah, you know, really in the car. So, but I paid a great price for that. You know, it affected me growing. As I got older, it really put me in a bubble. If you know what I mean, in this subconscious, this real self-conscious bubble. When you heard those words coming from a place of someone telling you that you can't do what you have joy in versus what they think you should do, how did that time, because now we use terms like toxic masculinity, homophobia. How did you perceive it at that time? Like
at that time, it wasn't like a choice of like, Shaun, like mama want to take dance class versus go out and play football. My mother being a single parent and me not having a father image, it was important for her. She was very vocal about being upset for me not having a male image. But it didn't bleed into me wanting to dance, because that I was saying at that time it wasn't offered because it only looked like ballerinas versus what we see now. You know what I mean? By the time I was toward the latter part of high school, that's when it looked like Leroy, even though it was like the world of dance, he was like, I ain't wearing no tights. So it was kind of like Leroy gave permission. But my mind didn't go to the toxic masculinity part to whatever, because even the storyline no one called him a sissy or anything like that, because he was with the ballet dancer, sweet, dark berry, the sweet with the juice moment. So it didn't put it in that bracket. But I just know, even just if you're putting it on that spectrum, growing up as a male, there was a time when things changed for us, when we had the innocence where we were able to express our feelings and cry and laugh and have fun and play with everybody, to then all of a sudden, guys don't do that anymore. Guys don't do that. Guys don't do that anymore. So for me, in my experience, because I wasn't with my mother saying guys don't do that, I was around my mother just wanting me to have a male influence other than just her being mom and dad. So that was always stored in my head. But then I went to 8 elementary schools, 2 junior high schools, and 3 high schools. So I changed. I was always the new kid in school. And I'm learning from the changes per school what men were no longer able to do, or boys. But I wasn't home hearing that boys don't cry, boys don't do this, whatever. It was more out in the streets when I was at school. And so I think when things started home, like you're saying, there's a base where you could either feel uncomfortable or not feel like you're able to be the best of yourself and blah, 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 blah. My mother was cautious because she knew how I was drawn. She knew the streets, and she knew that people considered me to be pretty. I was a child. So I would hear that ingrained. But to me, when I was at home, I wasn't pretty because I never got to be spoiled. I never got my way. A tear on cue never got me anything. But I knew the reaction I would get from the streets and from when I was with her. But she let me know that the perception of pretty in the world is effeminate. Because my mother was just as hilarious and just as open and fun, I could emulate anything. I could do the swag thing when that came out, or I can swish and swash. I can do all those things and we would laugh at home. But she would say, the world will judge you if you do that too good that way out in public because of that. I still didn't know what gay meant. I knew, you know, when you're young, it's like you're a punk or you're a sissy or whatever. So it's anything that's related to soft. But we weren't as educated right now with sexuality as it was back then to even apply sex to gay. I thought gay meant you wanted to be a girl because it went into effeminate. And then effeminate means you're trying to be a girl. So I only thought that was the lane that gay went to. Didn't know that they could fall in love. I didn't know the emotional part of it. I didn't know all that stuff together. But I do know I lived in this land of don't be feminine or be cautious of how you carry yourself so people won't think that you are. And at some point, I was able to say, well, I'm not. If I'm judged by how I look, I can't help that. But I'm not going to overcompensate based on that to make a point based on something that I'm not even participating in because I'm not having sex. So to have her plant that seed and then for her to die when I was 16, and then to live my life and then see the world that I lived in where I was giving and loving and affection and whatever, and to be judged more on a level of people thinking that I'm coming on to them more so. Because people thought that I'd be intimidating, but I was approachable, but then I'm a loving person, whatever. So those signals were crossed or misinterpreted, where I was still kind of trying to understand that dynamic because I was always with my family since I moved around a lot. So I was treating people like my family and we complimented each other. We loved on each other. So when I loved my friends and I was around artists, I was finding like in that world. So I knew then, and even to this day, people question, people think they try to figure you out. They think it's this one note. So growing up, I defied the toxic masculinity, which wasn't a term then. I went against what they told us we could not do, which has nothing to do with sexuality. I did not think women can have the freedom to express themselves and be all that they could be, and we are one note. Men are just one note. We're not Neanderthals. And there are some men that are that. But I refused to be limited to that, but I did not come. I think we could be our full selves and it has nothing to do with sexuality. I don't think because you're sensitive and loving whatever that makes you gay, and then if you're not, you're straight. And but that just didn't have anything because I knew me not having sex or anything had nothing to do with my human, my being. And because of the abilities I had on emotional, loving, sensitive level, I was a better friend and a better human being. And when I would see constantly people that are looking for some knuckle dragger boyfriend, guess what? He can't talk. He can't express himself because he's playing the male role because we can't have emotions. So I'm like, what the hell are you gonna have a relationship for? Girls may as well be with each other if you're gonna get some lump on the log, you know what I mean? So that was the avenue I tried. I rebelled against what they said we could not do. And I was like, I'm gonna be a full human being because we are. If I wasn't supposed to cry, then why are we made to cry? Why did God make us be able to cry? If guys aren't supposed to cry, then we should be able to cry. That makes sense to me. So I kind of drove it home on a logical level. And I had the comfort of my mother to express that because I said, you never given me a male example. And I said, and that's not the kind of man, the boyfriend that she may have had or whatever, is not the man I want to be. So that's not an example. If they were living with us, they weren't providing. So that shut her up because the male image that fits society is not ever, ever an image that I want to be as a man. We have to turn our head every time a girl passes by. We have to act like we hit it every time we got. That's like everything that shows weakness is what we get stamped as a man. No self-control, can't control your temper, like none of that represents a man to me. So I never played the game of it. So in the midst of that, then there's the questions of the sexuality thing like that. But I'm like, I don't want you to define me based on that because all that I'm doing and all I am has nothing to do with what I do behind closed doors. We can be human beings. And what I've done is created a synergy of men and all that can love on each other and be affectionate and say, I love you. You don't have to be drunk to say, I love you. And that's just, no matter what your background is and where you fall in on a sexual level, people have problems. And a lot of guys have problems because they were told not to be something. And I don't think as a society in America, were educated enough. They need to redefine masculinity versus effeminate, blah, blah, girls versus, because women can be even aggressive and strong, and they can even be tomboys growing up. And no one ever says, well, did you kiss a girl? Does it mean you're a lesbian? Girls can freely say that. I can't say, well, I used to tear up a Barbie doll's hair, a side pony and some bangs. They would ever, if we have a doll in our head, it's taken away from us. And what does that have to do with sexuality? But that's the signs that starts. And then you start feeling going in, now you don't want to play football. And all these things are like Neanderthal movements of what men are supposed to mean. That's not what all men mean. That's not a one note, you know what I mean? But women can be athletic, they can be on sports team, they can knit, they can cry, and it's like, no, I was like, we can be all those things too. And we are. And we don't have to be one note, you know what I mean? So I didn't tie it into the entertainment, I didn't tie it into anything. I wasn't told I could not dance. I was just thinking, because my mother was trying so hard for me to have the male influence, if I were trying to do ballet, that I don't think she would have embraced it. Since we did have the talk about masculinity and feminine and what people can read into or what people would think, you know what I mean? But I still refuse to play like, what's up? I wasn't gonna be like, okay, mom, I feel you. That's acting. How are we all clones? We don't all act that. We don't come out of the vagina like that.
Conforming.
It's learned behavior. Like, and if I want to be like, hey, that's all acting too. And girls aren't feminine. All women are feminine. All men aren't. Women have to learn to be poised. That's all learned behavior. And then some people fall in line that way. And then some men fall in line that way. You know what I mean? But putting forth effort either way is putting forth effort. But just being a human being is what's lost. A lot of times men aren't allowed. A lot of times we're not allowed or we're questioned.
I want to go back to something you talked about, because the show was spunked out of the whacking and punking community, which, you've experienced some of that culture. And now today, whacking and punking is celebrated on a liberated basis.
Yeah.
But you being from an earlier generation, how would you describe the term being a punk? Because you touched on it a bit, that being punk was lesser than. Why was it considered soft during that time?
And that's like a street term. That's like, don't be a punk, don't be soft. That's just a thing that you would hear in school, because guys can only be just one note. So that would be something, that was just a term. I was never at school where I was called punk, weak, or anything. What was funny when I went to school is that the advantage of going to so many different schools, you're being introduced all the time, right? Most of the time, if you're in a bubble and you live in the same neighborhood, your first impression of Tyrone and them and Jean and all that in your neighborhood was only in the sandbox. And then you grow up with them forever. And then whatever you form into is what it is. Because I kept going to schools and I know how I'm drawn, the interpretation is repeated of what they think I am based on a glance or 5 minutes. So I was able to play into the softness and the beauty that they thought I had, because I still wasn't never called a punk or anything like that, but it was just still, when you have just the rough and tough tumble guys that are just like that, they would try to punk me. Because girls would like me, and guys and everybody would like me because I was a good person and fun and blah, 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 blah. But there's the jealousy and there's all that. So they would try to punk me, and like punk me in the sense of like, I think try to bully me. And I'm too small to like have a tug of war in a match where you hit me first. So if you just rear back, it's on and popping. From Wonder Woman to the Bionic Man, Jamie Summers, all of them, I learned all that choreography and they were on the floor. And they didn't see it coming because I don't look like I can fight. But I had to make sure they don't get up because I'm too small to be wrestling with you. And then I had to make sure the art teacher came on time. So there were times where they were shocked, but by then I knew how I was drawn, because everybody just thought, you're so sweet and cute. Oh, we just love, you know what I mean? So then the guys would try to like step up to me, you know what I mean? So that was actually fun because I was aware of what the perception was. So shame on them for not getting to know. But that wasn't a constant, but there's a few times I had to prove that because of that, you know what I mean? But on the level of doing, punking and whacking and all that, I never took it literally on that term because I was just moving.
Oh, no, I just meaning like, because just culturalized, and that just kind of fill you in a little bit, because that conversation is happening, but people don't really understand the origin behind it. It's been explained, but they don't understand, like, you don't necessarily have to be in whacking culture to really walk down the street and hear the word punk or feel lesser than, you know. So going into that, I wanted to ask you, from your perspective, during the 80s and 90s, and what would you say, like, for those who were even Black, because during that time we had people like Willie Ninja, we had people like, of course, the late Tyrone Proctor, we had Shabba-Doo, which from another perspective of dance, you know. But what would you say, from what you saw, or maybe even experienced, was a challenge, particularly for queer dancers who were out, who were comfortable with themselves? Because I know you kind of touched.
Yeah. Ironically, me going into it innocent and naive, I didn't know that it was considered, you're just pretty much, if you're a male dancer, you're gay anyway. That's just what, I just didn't know that was a consideration. And since that was just the staple, especially if you're working as a dancer, there was never any hindrance on being hired because that was just a club in itself. Depending on the type of job, you know what I mean? If you're trying to play the male lead like Rudy Houston at the time, when he did Mercedes Boy and Janet Jackson, What Have You Done For Me Lately, he played the male lead. I was friends with him. I
what is her name now? I forgot her name. I know she's.
I don't know the name now. Yeah,
yeah.
I didn't know the name now. Yeah, there was never even conversation when I hung out with him because he was like my slightly older brother. But there was never a conversation about that. We didn't hang out other than talking about our careers and eating and just being creative together. But I didn't know that he went through all that emotionally and what he was going through until later. But other than him putting on the face to be the male lead in What Have You Done For Me Lately, in Leather Jacket or whatever, he wasn't like effeminate as a human being, but I didn't know consciously he was trying not to be based on how his upbringing was, because he was born Jehovah's Witness and he felt like he was an abomination because he only had one testicle. He was sensitive and his parents told him not to be sensitive and all those things. His life was different from mine. So by the time I met him, he wasn't trying to overcompensate with her. He was just a human being. But, you know, when he played the roles for Mercedes Boy and the whole thing, I mean, that's just a movement, that's acting, because that's what you're being. But I don't think it was ever questioned whether he was straight or gay or anything like that. You just kind of hire the look and see what's going on. Plus the look, because it wasn't hip hop back then, it wasn't lenient. I did have hair on all my videos. It was a different time, fashion wise and everything, where it wasn't so pressed to be the way it is now with swag and hip hop and baggy clothes, whatever. You know what I mean? It kind of meshed into it. Where we were wearing midriffs, we were showing our abs, but it was midriffs. We were like, so the fashion collectively, when you watch Staying Alive with John Travolta and all that, tight pants, you know what I mean? It was just accepted. So I didn't really feel it as there's this rejection or there's this dynamic. I was in the bubble finally, and then realizing, wow, there are a lot of gay, it's a lifestyle. There's a lot going on sexually. It didn't even seem like it was just necessarily gay in the sense more than free flowing. Because then once you get to know people and see it, they were doing all types of things. It wasn't just one lane. You saw different lanes if you had conversation, if it was open. But as far as dancing goes, it was expected that you were gay anyway. So a lot of the guys that weren't would overcompensate by like, dude, and then the few girls that were like happy that there was a straight guy, you know, their relationship or they're getting on, you know what I mean? There's that dynamic. But as a whole, I know we learned choreography then. So no one was, you know, the way things are now and people were that kind of movement wasn't out. So you're learning choreography. So no one was showing any other side of themselves other than the technique. So that wasn't really taught about trying to be more masculine or be more, I mean, men were always concerned because anything that regard to dance was soft, effeminate, whatever. So then you're always trying not to be that. If you didn't have male examples in class, you were trying to hit the line and be as strong as possible. And then choreography usually is different. We're not doing tippingography, we're doing more athletic choreography. There's no chance to be a chasse, pareil, you know what I mean? So right. The choreography in itself, where I was never in a situation where it seemed like it was questioned or hard or anything like that. And for me, to be honest, because I wasn't trained, more my concern was not getting caught because I kept getting hired. And I felt like I was the Milli Vanilli of the dance industry. Like I was gonna get caught. Every time I got a hot job, I thought they're gonna find out that I'm not trained. Because I just imitated. So I was in a world of just hearing about sexuality and then in a world of learning as I go and trying to act like I belonged. And convincingly so, because I kept getting more jobs and people kept thinking that I was just this diva dancer. Finally, I started taking from Doug Caldwell on Tuesdays and Thursdays just to find out what I was accidentally doing correctly in my alignment to know the technique. And because my body kind of lined up naturally, at least he was vocal about it. So I knew the knee goes over the toe. He would use me as an example, but now I'm like, note to self, knee over the toe, shoulders down. Like I'm imitating shoulders down, but I'm not consciously doing it because it's taught me. So I caught up to myself by taking his class twice a week, but I was still working. You know what I mean? So not until I did the recording industry situation where they were coming after me that way and wanting me to sign and blah, 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 blah. That's when I didn't know if I thought of it as a sexuality thing versus an insult to our race and then again to manhood, because our people wanted to sign me in the pop department, but the R&B were questioning my beauty to them. They were saying androgynous. I'm thinking, well, I'm not dressed like Prince. I don't have heels on. I'm not wearing eyeliner. But they just kept saying, but he's pretty, but he's pretty. And is he black enough for black radio? So it became like black enough for black radio. And I'm like, black people aren't pretty. They're not letting us be pretty. Rob Below and all these other people get to be pretty when they're white, but we can't. So they tried to keep it one note. They wanted sweaty, chicken circuit, preacher man, rap. They wanted that image. And they wanted me, if I came from Europe with an accent and I had fashion sense, that would have been acceptable to be who I was because it's European. But here they wanted me to be in this black bubble, one note way that they thought would sell records because that's what they think black people represented. And those are the people that will buy the songs. So I didn't know if it was, I didn't know if they were questioning my sexuality because it was always about the beauty and then being black and black enough, and black enough, am I black enough? So that was in question. So that sucked. And that was the only time it was like played on a masculine or feminine level. But I never really heard gay or anything being said. But just, it goes back to my mom with society would see that, you know what I mean? So that played kind of weird. And then because of that, I didn't want to emulate an image that I wasn't. Because I'm Shaun. And if you're going to sign Shaun, this is what you're going to get. And that's the audience I want.
So would you say the freedom you had playing Angel and Rick versus stepping out on your own from being background from Paula and being a lead dancer in Fame, like between the two, and a record exec saying, well, how do we market this individual because of X, Y, Z? Where would you feel comfortable in, either as in the role in that production, in the set of those group of individuals on Red, where you felt you probably have more freedom, or in just talking to the dancers that are listening? Where would you say the freedom is?
If there's dancers listening right now, I'm talking about like late 80s, early 90s. If everything that I did and came out now, because the world has embraced so much more, this would have been the time for me to have done it. Because it would have been more accepting. They would have actually played on it when that wouldn't have been anything I was thinking about. They would have played on it now because
that's interesting.
The world's more open right now. There's a lot of that going on when they didn't know how to market me before, because I could lay out and come back up and wear my leather jacket. And I was trying to show that there's more than just the Running Man. Helene even choreographed my video and they loved it. They just didn't see anyone do it before. So it makes their job harder if they don't have anybody to compare it to. And Michael Jackson and Prince were the only people that got to step out the box and be pop and all that. Michael's royalty, Prince is royalty playing all his instruments, you know what I mean? And then there was me, where they had never seen anybody do a layout and come back up and do a toe touch and then get the mic and keep singing. They never saw that before. They didn't know what to market it, what to call it. Would people like it? Is it Black enough? Do Black people do that? You know, it was just their limit experience. Now, I mean, when RuPaul came out, that was a big deal. And I wasn't anything like that. But I'm just saying that paved the way because it started working. And then now, like this world, like we have so many labels now from, I don't even know them. So if I did exactly what I did right now and came out with the same video and the same everything, with the hair and the whole whatever, this would have been the time because no one looked that way at that time. When I did Rent, because even with Fame, they found out that I could sing. So I was a reoccurring actor on that show as well. They had an excuse for me to sing, and I'd do something with Debbie, I'd do something with Leroy, Three Cool Cats, whatever. So I got to step out of that. I personally, I guess, shocked people because I never thought dancing was lower and then singing's higher and then acting, because I just knew how to do all three. But I just stayed in the lane that I got hired in because I was just still in shock that I'm doing what I dreamed about doing. So I never saw it as a level. You're treated differently, of course, if you're on the set. Dancers versus when you have a speaking part and now you're in your own dressing room versus whatever. But I never felt like this week I'm an actor. I've always been an actor. So don't treat me any different. I'm still going to fold my clothes like I did last week because I'm going to do it next week when I'm a dancer again. So I never allowed them to star me up for 1 week or two because I'm doing a pre-recorded song that I'm going to be lip syncing and then saying a few lines. That didn't make sense to me. I always knew who I was. So I think later on, even with Paula, I got to sing with her on the road. I got to sing opposite track and all those things like that. So I always, some people knew my ability beyond dancing, but I was never a person that's like, look what I can do. Because when the timing's right for the people to find out what it needs to be, that I never even promoted the fact that I was shopping for record deals. I never said anything. I just did my jobs when I was doing them. I never felt like I had to be like, but I also, because I thought dancing was spectacular, especially when I was learning as I went and I saw how hard it was. It was unfortunate that they're not respected the same way, but that was a choice and I loved it and I saw the world because of it. Rent happened randomly because I was on tour with Reba for 3 years. And it was a United States tour.
That's when Anthony Thomas was choreographed?
That was Gary Evans was the tour for Reba McEntire. I think Anthony's Janet.
No. I'm thinking of the Judds.
Oh, yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, Reba McEntire. I was 3 years country. I was like, what? And to go country and be treated better than I was with Shanice, to Jasmine Guy, to Paula Abdul. Like for me to have medical and dental with a country singer, I was introduced to a 401k. The country department, they don't deal with the record companies. They only sell records through them. They have to put themselves on tour. It's their responsibility. So they get all the money. So on a business level, I learned that part of it because Reba was on our checks, not MCA Records. Reba was on our checks. So that was like, oh, check, note to self. So randomly, when we didn't do the 4th year, my agent Susan, when I was with Bobby Ball, sent me to the audition for Rent. Usually the process is they send your picture to the casting. They say, oh, he looks like he can be a Benny, or he looks like he can be a Collins, or whatever. That's the proper order.
They were still doing only picture selects.
Yeah. You know, because when the storyboards come out, just like with agents, whatever, they weren't. It wasn't online back then. You know, you send them, but because they had just found out that I wasn't going back with Reba, Susan told them to expect me to come, but she made me just run out to Santa Monica and pick anything. I just like the name Angel because my friends call me their angel. So I just chose that on a whim and then got the music and then learned it because the audition was the next day. I had no idea what I was getting myself into. I knew that it won Tony Awards and blah, 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 blah. But I didn't know who was what character. I didn't know what I was getting into at all. And then when I got the sheet music, they wanted me to learn one and sing it as a solo. But they also, for the process of elimination, they told us to also get like a pop rock, gospel. They don't want anything Broadway. They pride themselves on not having Broadway people in the room because it's a rock opera. So they want to make it look like they discovered raw talent from the streets. They didn't want Broadway people auditioning for Rent. So I had to get sheet music for that as well. And then that's when they do the process of elimination, because you sing that first and then they typecast you and send you out. So I went through that process at the last minute. I hate auditioning. God literally, it was like the burning bush said, get out of bed and do it. Because I so wanted to just stay home, watch all my children eat my cereal. Because I hate, especially because it wasn't planned, it wasn't organized. So now I'm not even knowing if I got the right paper for the right part, for the right person. So there's a song called I'll Cover You that shows you off more vocally than Today for You. So I sang that as a solo, and then the rest is history. I got about 5 callbacks after that, and they sent me straight to Boston.
Mm.
And I was just in this rent bubble, and I learned the show because I got hired for a show that I didn't know what it meant, so I had to see it when I got there. And then maybe 6 or 7 months into it, I had the role and opened in Chicago, and then from there they sent me to Broadway to do it there. But this, I tell you, has never been on my bucket list because I'm from LA. I'm not a Broadway singer. I don't know show tunes. I don't know that whole, there's nothing about it that I know, other than us knowing about The Wiz, because we all sing Home and we know Stephanie. And then Dreamgirls, keeping it real for our peeps. But that's about all I knew. I don't know Fiddler on the Roof and Annie Get Your Gun. Like, I'm not cultured that way. So it was just random that I got this. And then 8 show a week grind. And then constantly singing. You got to take care of yourself differently than when you're using your muscles. And then I had to move. It's not like a dance show by any means. They kept it more pedestrian movement. But because I was able to dance, I was able to incorporate more stuff that other people couldn't do. Which sparked a lot of people's interest because they had never seen an angel do it that way.
And inspired movie role too.
Yeah. So that was a fun ride. Again, it was quite interesting because to think from my journey that we've discussed, even off of this, thinking from my mother's perspective, thinking from the world's perspective, and thinking pretty, record company pretty, and then when I finally get a break, it's to be a cross-dresser. That was crazy. You know what I mean? Like, oh, really? So do I just embrace the pretty? And not that Angel has to be pretty, but it was just kind of ironic that one of the biggest things I had achieved was to be on Broadway, and it happens to be.
So would you say, before my next question, because you said something dealing with branding and marketing, because I remember one of the Madonna dancers, Kevin
Stay.
when he would explained how when he was on tour, after the Blonde Ambition tour was over, he was labeled the Madonna dancer. So it made it harder for him to get work.
Other stuff outside of it? Okay.
Would you say that label kind of stuck with you? Like just talking to dancers and not just young dancers, but all dancers?
No, well, first of all, because no dancers, unless they're interested in Broadway, saw me in Rent. And Broadway is a different home market. So even if it was like the fear of being stereotyped or anything, no one saw who didn't see it. I mean, if I have a credit, that's it. But no one, I didn't have a lasting impression because it wasn't like in people's living rooms like I did at Friends or Will and Grace. You know what I mean? So that did not stop anything, a flow on anything afterwards, because it didn't have a universal appeal to have anything hinder me that way. You know what I mean? If it was a show that I did every week and they just always saw me in drag, maybe that could be an issue. Because a lot of times, even people in the industry that know better will still only see you as a comedian. And they can't let Jim Carrey do something serious. There's just people that cannot let Joe Pesci be, but there's just people that they won't hire for those reasons. There's the guy that did the Sprint commercials all the time. He tried to have a real life outside of it. They only see Sprint commercial. You know what I mean? So it depends on the people. So there is a dynamic of being stereotyped or typecast, sorry. But because it was Rent and it was only on Broadway and on tour, I didn't come home with the world knowing who I was, and now I can't see past it. Coming here, whether they read on my resume, I never walked into a casting and they're like, oh, you're so good at Rent. They don't know.
So for my next question, because again, our audience are performers, dancers, people who may be interested. And I know a lot of times when these conversations happen, people think you're just talking to young dancers. And in this day and age, dancers can range from any age all the way up to 60. Honey, Tina Turner's still doing it on stage.
Right.
So I wanted to ask you again, because you come from a time where you had to be a triple threat. And now you kind of see it a little bit, but it's not as emphasized. You know, overall, how would you say it was important for you to be able to act, sing, and dance for someone to even look at you? Because you already, not to say to throw this label on you, you still kind of, you know, according to a casting director, they still kind of had their perceptions the minute you walked through the door. So you had to be able to show you had those requirements to being able to sing, act, and dance. How important would you say those three things were back then?
Well, again, like I told you, I walked in blindly, so I didn't know what the expectation was. And I didn't know what a triple threat was until someone called me that. So I was like, what do you mean? What's that? I'm nice, I'm not a threat. So I didn't know what that meant. I did not know that was what was required, because in LA, like Broadway's triple threat because it's theater. It's musical theater, there's shows where that happens. Here, if you're doing a video, no one's telling you to dance and sing and act. So a lot of times, on the contrary, when people found out that I could do all three, they're telling me to choose. But what do you really do? But I know, but are you more of a dancer? But so it was more confusing on the West Coast to say that you did all three, because they're still trying to make you choose one. Depending on the show, if you're doing a video versus touring on a show with Janet, those things aren't asked for you to sing and act and dance, because dancers were just in one lane, always. You trying to convince that you can do more was probably more of a thing, because they think they think dancers can't act at all because they indicate, because they're used to moving. You know what I mean? So it's usually harder to convince that you are a triple threat. I was singing because I would do session work, but nobody has to know that I'm doing session work, because I'm with Karen White doing a session with Babyface in LA. No one sees me doing that until she thanks me on the credits. If you dare to read it, you don't even know I'm on her album. That's all separate. So I had three different worlds going on. If I was doing acting, whatever, I was doing shows sometimes, because Kim Fields was, you know, Facts of Life back then, and her mom was like my mom, and we're like brother and sister. So Malcolm Jamal Warner, myself, Teresa Randall, all these people, we were in a little group where we did plays that her mother wrote. So I would star in shows with Kim Fields, but that was a whole nother bubble as well. So I was getting exercise that way. And then when I was on Fame, I was just dancing I got hired as a dancer. So that was, none of them were like where I had to act, sing, and dance. No one was testing that ever. I just so happened, because the channels crossed, because I was doing a Chip Fields production at the same time I was doing Fame. And Chip wanted more dancers, so I asked some of the people from our show to come into our side to do that. That's when they realized, oh, because I was actually starring in that show, and they didn't even know that I did all that. So then when the word got out, when we had to we would do benefits and fundraisers and do things for Red Cross or whatever. We would travel usually to Canada, all over the United States on the weekends. We just so happened did a show here for Red Cross. And just so happened, because one of the songs they did on the show was Baby I'm a Star by Prince, but all the leads have their verses. Carlo didn't show up to this situation. And they were like, Shaun, can you just sing that part, because we know you sing, and just do Carlo's part. And I'm like, oh, okay. Just so happened, Divine Order, the major producer of Fame, was in the audience. And he never gets to see us because we're never doing anything local. He saw me do my verse on Baby I'm a Star. And it was like, oh my God, I didn't know he could sing. Literally, they started writing stuff for me when I got back. And that's not even a song like, and I am telling you. That's like Baby I'm a Star. It's like, you know.
The Prince, by the way.
Yeah. Baby I'm a Star. He's just like, you know, might not know it now.
You know,
you know, you're like, it was like, but, and that opened the door just from that. And then they started writing me in and blah, 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 blah. So then that was something that he just found out, and they started writing me in. But no, it's the opposite here to prove it, because they expect you to only choose one thing.
Right.
Years later, I star in Rent and on Broadway. So people that I've done videos with, Robia from Guy, and people come see Broadway shows. I didn't know that, because I don't go see Broadway shows, not unless they're in town. So people were like backstage that I didn't even know came, over the summer, like, oh my God, why didn't you tell me? Like, I didn't know. I was like, no, what? They're like, I didn't know that you could do all that. I was like, well, we were doing a video. Why did you have to know? You don't have to know until you have to know. And thanks for coming. You know what I mean? But I never chewed at my horn and said I was doing more or less because I never thought I was like less than dancing versus saying 2 lines versus, you know what I mean, singing a song. I just loved doing what we do. That's what I mean. I'm telling you, that was my relationship. If there's a label for that, that's who I am because I love breathe. We're breathing. That's who we are. No matter how old you ever get, you're always gonna be a dancer. That's who you are. That's your spirit.
Mm-hmm.
Sing, if you whatever, that's God given. And not everybody can do it. The people that really can't, they envious. They can't hear
Raw
notes.
talent, right?
Yeah, but that's God made us for a reason. And those who dare to embrace that, it takes faith, it takes perseverance, it takes the rejection. But whether you're hired or not, you are who you are. That's just who you are. Most people always ask, because people come out and there's always stories of coming out, but I always ask people, because of the entertainment, when did you know? And when did you tell your parents? Because there's also a dynamic when you don't want to get a real job and you don't want to go to school.
Right.
Be an actor. There's still a dynamic even with that. And there's a reaction to families the same way.
Well, I'm gonna backtrack a little bit. When you touched on sexuality, and because your career was up and going during a time when particularly a lot of Black and brown men were falling victim to the AIDS epidemic.
Exactly.
And I remember talking to an agent during that time. We were a good friend of mine was sharing their story with me about how, during that time because no one knew
Right.
what this epidemic was, how it could, how a person could contract it.
Yeah.
Right. But also they were losing a lot of male clients. You saw a decline in male dancers.
Wow.
How did that affect you? Like, what did you see, and how did it affect you as a working dancer, being going into the dance studio?
Right.
Like, what did you, what was that effect on you, or if it had it?
Yeah. Well, in the early part of the 80s, I was still in high school. So the news and all that, the whole thing that people were saying, I was completely blocked from that because I lived with my grandmother and we were just watching our shows and I didn't know what AIDS even meant. Out of high school, and when I moved into my first place, I was 19. I auditioned for something and did not get it. Someone saw me at the audition and said, I want you to do something else. And Claude Thompson at the time was choreographing, and the whole Thriller era was out. And Lorraine Fields was one of the side monsters because there were 2 women that planked him. So she was famous for being like the monster number 3 on the right. So they had her star with a lot of like maybe 8 guys. And we did a whole tribute to Michael Jackson songs, Thriller, all that, whatever. And there was a guy named Jerome, I forgot, Helene knows him because she took from him. And I found out after that gig, because it was like their first video awards before MTV came. So it was a big deal. And Who You Gonna Call, both Ghostbusters, Girls Wanna Have Fun, all those hits were circulating at the time. And I remember I was like the baby. I always was the baby that got hired amongst these grown-ups that didn't even audition. They know the choreographer. So I was always in a new world. And the guy had spinal meningitis. And I was like, oh, well, pray for him because I heard news about it. We were on cell phones, but I heard about it. And then I heard he died from spinal meningitis. So back then, when people were dying, they weren't saying AIDS. They were saying what it was related to. So I went through a good period of time hearing about people dying, still not hearing AIDS, because they were saying what the form of what it was that caused, that it attacked. So when I fast forward to Fame, I do remember in my 12th grade year of high school, I got to do an episode of it because I auditioned when I was 16, but it was a big cattle call. I didn't know I was supposed to be 18 when I auditioned. And so finally, when Debbie called, she wanted me to do the last episode of the very first season. But at that audition, when I was 16 in the summer, I had met Gene Anthony Ray already. He had befriended me. and a lot of the male guy dancers, especially the two Black guys, Daryl Tribble and Derek Bryce. Derek Bryce was our very own, because he did Lulu Washington and all that. So we knew him from our city. So it was like we were proud of our guy that was on TV every week. So that was so he knew that he was supporting me when I auditioned, and then he introduced me to Daryl Tribble. And so that's the people I knew. So by the time I got on the show, I already kind of knew them, and I felt comfortable. And by the time I got on the show permanently 4 years later, that's when they were sick, Derek Tribble and Derek Bryce. So I went to 2 funerals during the time I was on Fame. That's when it affected me. It was still 80s. It was the latter part of the 80s, like 86, 87. But that's when it hit me, because now it's people that I know. And mind you, because everybody was so free flowing, to see the fear in the people's eyes, because they all hung out, guys and girls, to see that fear of wondering if they also had it was like freaky to watch, because I was around so much sexuality and so much openness and so much freedom. And then we're looking at now the people dying, and now they're looking at the chain of desire where they were linked, like with Corona. You know what I mean? It's kind of like,
right.
Is it going to happen to me? Is it going to happen to me? Is it going to happen to me? That feeling. And since I wasn't active, it wasn't a worry of mine, but looking at people that celebrated sex so highly and were openly just doing that thing, I was happy that I wasn't amongst them that were wondering, but it made me even more afraid of sex. Because in the 60s, they make a free love and everybody had, if we were born in the 60s, it seemed like there was no repercussions. Or you can just get a shot and get rid of the whatever it was, the gonorrhea or whatever. But this was like a life sentence. And
right.
There was no cure, there was no cocktail, there was no anything. So that kept me staying creative and out of people's bedrooms even more so. Because that was pretty scary. Helene Phillips, because she was really in the 80s and in the thick of it with the career like Tony Fields and all that, and saw the gold. Meeting her, because I auditioned for Captain EO before I auditioned for Fame. And then I made friends with her in 86. But to look at her phone book and have all these people that are checked out, it affected her more. Michael Perea, she has a list because she was, because even for us, it was like an older generation. Me, Bubba Carr, and all these other people that came along later, they weren't that grown, but there's a almost close to 10-year difference from
Michael Peters.
That whole thing. There's a bigger generation that was really in that cesspool, so to speak,
right?
Where it was more, we were like a little more on the outside. I guess people that were daring probably peeked in a little bit, but it was more Helene's generation because they were already working in that pool. So she can be like, Michael Perea gone, all these different people that she's lost. It affected me because my friends were gone, from that. And then an artist later on and just different people like that. But that was like, as far as the impact, it was during the show when I'm going to a funeral and Debbie's there. And you know what I mean? Like, it was just like, that was crazy. Right. And then now you're hearing more about it. But then it was just like, oh my God, like, I'm old enough to have sex now and I can't, like, it was just like it was a very weird, because it was still unknown. At that time, it wasn't like, you can't touch me, or what it was like. It wasn't, we weren't fearing people, but just seeing people that were scared. And Jean Anthony Ray literally like survived the whole thing. Years later, went back home after we wrapped. He had a drug experience and an alcoholism experience, whatever that people knew about. He got clean and sober, moved back to LA, and because I'm the person that doesn't do anything, he moved in with me. And still, he looked great because he cleaned up. And there were always rumors about him dying or dead. My roommate worked with someone, they said, Gene's dead. And they're like, well, no, my roommate talked to him on the phone yesterday. But people were spreading rumors about him having it. There was an episode, I guess, when Debbie visited him in the hospital, there was a situation, but everyone, the news or whatever, the gossip made it into something. And then 94, 95, he was living with me. Like, he stayed for like a good 8-month period, and then he moved out. And then suddenly, because everybody knew what his track record was before, and everyone was happy that he was healthy and strong and getting his life together out here. But then he started experiencing dementia and popping up in places not quite clear, but they didn't know, did he start drinking again? Like, what's going on? Like, they weren't sure. And Paula Brown took the initiative to finally take him to Cedars-Sinai to find out why. Because there was one point where he showed up at an audition or whatever, or a rehearsal with Earth and all them, but he didn't know where his car was, and he left it in the middle of the streets with it still running. So there were some things going on where they were like, what's going on? And the dementia was HIV related.
Mhm.
So all that time, he was like a bullet. Like, he outlived all of them. And then I don't think he properly took care of himself, because at that time they had the tools to do things, you know, and he didn't take care of himself properly and moved to Italy and eventually died. But that was still like not, I was doing Rent by then. But that was like my brother. That was like, everybody thought we were brothers. You know what I mean? It was like loved. And to think how close we became when he was that person on screen that gave me permission to dance. That
And
was,
for those who don't know, Gene Anthony Ray is the leading role of Fame, Leroy,
yeah, Leroy
for
the
years.
movie and the TV show. Yes.
Um,
That was devastating for me too.
um, whew, yeah, because again, thank you for sharing with us, because a lot of elements, you know, whackers now today battle, and whacking is presented through cisgender eyes, just to kind of,
Oh, really?
you know, the LGBTQ element is usually left out, and they don't realize like a lot of the pirouettes and stuff that they pull from. You know, there are some folks like Lockeroo in New York who still pay tribute to that era, what people used to, I hated that term, used to call it thrash, or the precision in a pirouette, or the jazz, or cater to that, but without recognition, understanding the people behind it, the people, you know, not just the Fosse's, but also those who kept it alive between the 80s, the Billy Goodsons.
Yeah, because he did everything.
Yeah.
He would be locking and kicking, layup, pirouette. Exactly. He put it all together. Yeah.
Exactly. So it's just really understanding their journey and what it was like, particularly for Black folks, you know, and really having to survive in the industry. So I wanted to ask you, because we're going to wrap up soon, what would you say to, again, dancers, particularly queer dancers, but what would you say, what would you want to leave them with, you know, especially in a time as we're coming out of the lockdown?
Well, for me, I think, because I don't come from a snobby classical background on any level, whether it's acting, where I've trained, whether it's dancing. I come from a very like raw spiritual place. I emulated, I saw what I saw in Soul Train, where they were whacking and doing all their stuff like that. I never knew the history of it in depth, like even with you. I met Shabadoo, not knowing the depth of him, because I went to Japan with him. That was my first time out of the country to go to Japan to do a Nissan Datsun commercial. And he's my friend. I spoke to him like the night before he died, not knowing that he was going to die. He was saying it was fine. So I've seen them, but as far as just movement itself, I just hope that you guys don't separate yourselves or think you're less than, because there's actors, there's dancers, there's people that kind of separate to make it look like they're better than because they have the technique and the training and blah, 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 blah. And me coming from a raw place of just not, I think being clearly blissful in my ignorance, I wasn't clouded with those doubts and uncertainty because of the class behind dance. Therefore, if I had to do like if I had to do, you know, Shaun or whatever the ballet term was, or glissade, if they showed that on Soul Train, I would have been doing it, because I just imitated movement. So whether it's whacking, whether it's punking, whether it's thrashing, whatever they want to call it, everyone cannot do that. What you are interested in doing, however you want to market yourself as a dancer, live and do it. There's room now. There's a marketplace for all of us now on every level. But don't limit yourself thinking that that's the only box you can stay in, because the fact that you can move enables you to do anything you want to do movement-wise, because everyone can't move. But you block yourself and say, well, that's not my lane, or I don't do that. That's on you. I've had a bigger career because I had to be in a classroom scene, and I'm doing ballet. I had to do a Bugsby Berkeley scene tapping. I had to do Paul Abdul's video, Is Just the Way You Love Me. There's a whole tap sequence at the end. I just imitate. I never let my mind or doubt tell me that I couldn't do something, based on what people's process is when they had to start at 3 and do this. There's no order, and everybody can get to the destination, and everyone gets there in a different way. You know what I mean?
Can you say that again?
Everyone can get to the destination, but their journey to get there, it's all different. It's not, well, first I do this, and then I do this, and that. You have to know your body and know how it goes. My journey, I can only give God the glory because that's the only thing that I can give credit to, because it wasn't based on, well, when I was 3, my mother took me to Dolly Dinkle School of Dance until I was 7. Then I transferred to do parade. Like, I don't have that story.
Mm-hmm.
All I have is what I saw, what I did, and what God gave me. And God gave you the same thing. The ability to move is a gift. That's not something that everybody can do. How far you want to go into it, don't limit yourself, because you can do all types of movement. Of course, if you're in a lane where it's just punking, blah, 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 that's the only way you will work. But if you want to venture out and have a bigger career, of course, then there's more you can do. So therefore, embrace the learning. Don't let it diminish the rawness that you have. Just apply it the same way you learn how to do this, whatever. There's proper ways of doing this. There's proper ways of doing this. There's proper ways of locking. There's all these techniques even to that. Shabadoo will just drill the hell out of this, or this, you know what I mean? There's ways, there's a technique behind it. So all that is the same as if you took a jazz class or took a whatever class. Anything that you're interested in, because I don't want to be a ballet dancer, but I know how to emulate it, but I've never had to be in a dance company to do it. But there's instances where they're pulling it out. And then that is the foundation where you have to know how to pirouette and know your center. There's a core element of ballet. But don't let any of these styles or anything intimidate you. And the people that make you feel intimidated or aren't welcoming or whatever, do it all for you. Get the best you can get out of it, which is what we're here for. We're here to get everything we can get out of life for ourselves and for your circle, your friends, your village, or whatever. But if you don't, it's going to be only your fault. You know what I mean? Like, if you want to eat hamburgers and French fries, and that's all, and you're satisfied, great. But if you want to try Thai and Korean barbecue and something, it's just that's the same thing with dance. You know what I mean? But the fact that you can move is the gift. So just apply it the same way with other versions of dance, other styles of dance, because dance is just dance.
Thank you so much. This concludes our special edition episode of Waackchat. And I want to thank our special guest, Shaun Earl. Thank you so much.
Pleasure.
Thank you. I'd like to conclude with a quote from queer activist Barbara Giddings. Equality means that passing laws, the struggle is really won in the hearts and minds of the community where it really counts. Thank you all for watching this episode of Waackchat, and hope to see you again soon. Thank you, Shaun. Take care.
You too. God bless.
Waackchat, Whose Pride Edition, created by Dave Johnson, produced by Ken Folks, and located within the Queer Arts Center in Oakland, California, sitting on unceded Ohlone territory. This has been an amazing conversation for an entire month, having an opportunity to speak to creatives about homophobia, toxic masculinity, conformity, inclusion, and other taboo topics that we must begin to unpack in order to evolve as a community. Thank you for joining us. If you're interested in continuing these types of dialogues, Waackchat is looking for sponsors. Contact us at queerartscenter.com if you're interested in becoming a sponsor. Take care.
Even just if you're putting it on that spectrum, growing up as a male, there was a time when things changed for us, when we had the innocence where we were able to express our feelings and cry and laugh and have fun and play with everybody, to then all of a sudden, guys don't do that anymore. Guys don't do that. Guys don't do that anymore.